What's up, everybody? Welcome back to NASCAR World News. While Denny Hamlin was soaking in an emotional victory at Las Vegas on Sunday, a courtroom showdown in North Carolina was intensifying rapidly, and what just unfolded could send shockwaves through the entire NASCAR paddock. On Monday, March 16th, a federal courthouse in Charlotte was filled with some of the most recognizable names in racing. Joe Gibbs himself walked through the doors alongside team president Dave Alpern and executive Heather Gibbs. Even Denny Hamlin showed up and took a seat in the gallery to observe. Across the room sat Gabe Hart with Spire Motorsports co-owner Jeff Dickerson and their respective legal teams. This was no routine hearing. Judge Susan Rodriguez heard arguments from three separate attorneys: Sarah Hutchins, representing JGR, Carrie Davis, representing Gabe Hart, and John Gibbs III, representing Spire Motorsports. When the dust settled, the judge came down firmly on JGR's side. She granted them what's known as narrowly tailored expedited discovery against Gabe Hart. But she also handed Gabe Hart something in return: reciprocal discovery rights against JGR. Both parties gained ground, but JGR walked away with the bigger victory by a wide margin. In most legal battles, exchanging documents and evidence drags on for weeks or even months. Expedited discovery throws that slow process completely out the window. It means JGR can begin combing through Hart's records without delay. The judge gave both parties until the close of the weekend to hand everything over. In legal terms, that turnaround is extraordinarily fast. To truly grasp why this matters, you need the background. Gabe Hart was a JGR insider for over a decade. He came in as an engineer, worked his way up to crew chief, and eventually landed the role of competition director. He had deep knowledge of every corner of that organization. Then, earlier this year, Spire Motorsports announced they had brought Hart on board as their new chief motorsports officer. JGR was furious. On February 19th, JGR hauled Gabe Hart into court. Their attorney, Tom Melsheimer, told the judge that Hart had stolen what he described as the crown jewels of JGR's NASCAR program. The team's pursuing more than $8 million in damages, and the evidence they presented is difficult to dismiss. Nobody disputes that Gabe Hart used his personal cell phone to photograph his computer screen at JGR and saved over 200 team files into a folder he literally labeled Spire. JGR claims he deliberately used his phone camera rather than screenshots because he believed it would go undetected. Even Hart's own attorneys have acknowledged he feels embarrassed about the entire situation. But Gabe Hart's legal team is telling a completely different version. They argue that JGR's entire case is built on assumptions. They say JGR has not produced a single piece of evidence that Hart actually forwarded any of those files to Spire. They maintain there is absolutely no proof that anyone at Spire ever received JGR's data, and they insist nobody at Spire has ever made use of any of it. In their words, the entire lawsuit is speculation, not substance. At the center of this dispute sits a contract clause that both parties interpret very differently. Section 6, paragraph 2 of Hart's employment agreement stated that if his job responsibilities shifted from what he was originally promised and JGR failed to resolve the issue within 60 days of being notified, then his non-compete would shrink to just 1 week. JGR would owe him $100,000. Hart says that is precisely what occurred. He kept his title as competition director, but argued that critical decisions surrounding the number 54 car were being made entirely without his involvement. He felt his authority was being sidestepped and that he never received the full control he had been promised. That's what pushed him toward the exit. JGR reads the situation completely differently. They argue Hart was the one who violated the agreement first by taking their confidential files. They terminated him for cause on February 9th, but Hart's attorneys are quick to flag that the firing came 3 months after he informed JGR he wanted out, 3 months after they stopped issuing his paychecks, and only after their own forensic examination of his devices turned up no evidence he had shared anything with Spire. There was also a complicated trade arrangement sitting squarely in the middle of all this. Spire co-owner Jeff Dickerson told the court that the two organizations had an existing agreement. An employee named Smith departed Spire to join JGR. In exchange, Spire was supposed to receive a JGR employee in return or collect a $100,000 payment. But according to Dickerson, JGR never delivered. He says he approached JGR twice, requesting the release of specific employees so Spire could bring them on, and both times JGR declined. Dickerson also made abundantly clear that Spire has zero interest in JGR's proprietary information, given their alignment with Hendrick Motorsports. He even extended JGR an open invitation to inspect Spire's computer systems directly, but JGR declined that offer and pursued litigation instead. In Dickerson's view, JGR deliberately orchestrated this legal action to disrupt Spire's legitimate business operations right in the thick of the season. There is also a timeline dispute. A JGR employee named Todd Barrier stated that Hart told him about meeting Spire co-owner Taus about a job back in October 2025, but both Hart and Taus deny that entirely. Taus submitted a sworn statement confirming he did not meet Hart at any point during 2025. Hart maintains his first contact with Spire was a brief phone call on January 9, 2026. Hart also pushed back firmly on the suggestion that his Spire role mirrors his former JGR role. He mapped out everything he handled at JGR versus his current responsibilities and highlighted that Spire already employs 3 crew chiefs, a competition director in Matt McCall, a technical director, and a head of vehicle optimization. His new position, he contends, is entirely distinct. Now back to what Judge Rodriguez actually decided. She did not hand JGR everything they requested. She worked through all 7 of their discovery requests individually. She permitted JGR to access communications between Hart and Spire surrounding his hiring, documents related to his chief motorsports officer duties, and files he produced between October 2025 and February 2026 connected to the Spire role. She also allowed discovery concerning JGR's race setups, but tightened the language considerably. The judge felt terms like strategy and operations were far too sweeping, so both parties settled on analytics instead. But the judge blocked several of JGR's broader requests. She rejected their push to obtain communications between Hart and other JGR employees about joining Spire, and she denied JGR's bid to issue subpoenas to outside parties, including Justin Marks and Todd Meredith from Spire, Joe Custer from Host Factory Team, and Rick Ware and Tommy Baldwin from Rick Ware Racing. Here is the piece many people are overlooking. The reciprocal discovery Hart secured could sting JGR significantly. His attorneys now have access to JGR's internal communications regarding how they interpreted his contract, why they withheld his compensation, and how they arrived at the decision to terminate him. If JGR mishandled any aspect of his exit, that information is now on its way to the surface. The judge also extended the temporary restraining order for Hart through March 26th. He may continue working at Spire, but he cannot perform any duties resembling his former competition director role at JGR. The team was required to post a $100,000 bond to maintain that order, and JGR has signaled clearly they intend to keep Hart away from Spire for the full 18 months remaining on his contract. Spire Motorsports, meanwhile, was largely excluded from the expedited discovery process. The judge ruled their situation falls under standard court procedures rather than the accelerated timeline.